Welcome, everybody, to today's Service Management Webcast. I think we'll go ahead and get started here. Today's session on upgrade troubleshooting is hosted by Alex Peretti, along with John Ragu from support. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Chris. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today the upgrade troubleshooting session. This is kind of a part two to a session that we had at the beginning of the month related to upgrade planning. So I hope that you had a chance to check that out. Just to kind of clarify, during the session today, we have an open Q&A where John Israel and Raju is in the Q&A answering your questions, and at the end of the session today, we'll have an open forum Q&A. So let's just get into the agenda. So this is kind of a summary of what we're going to touch on today. We're going to quickly do a recap of the other previous session that I had mentioned just before. We're going to talk about troubleshooting problems that you may run into with the unified installer. We're going to talk about some database migration issues. Then we're going to go into the service desk customization upgrade utility, and I'll highlight some helpful resources, and then, of course, the Q&A. Let's go ahead and proceed. So first, the recap. Like I said at the beginning of the month, we had a webcast called Service Management Demystifying the Upgrade Process. And during that session, I went into all the benefits and the good things that you can get by performing an upgrade, getting on the latest version, helping you to stay on a supported release, allowing you to have new functionality, all those benefits. I also outlined some best practices for the planning and testing of your upgrade, and then also highlighted a couple of tools for the upgrade process, including one of those tools was the Services Manager Customization Upgrade Utility, and we are going to go into that a little bit more later in the session, focus on that a little bit further. And there's a link there for the communities link to get to the previous webcast. You can review that later. Today, though, I want to focus on different problems that may arise with the upgrade. Of course, you know, we all like to hope that with the most planning and testing that everything's going to go perfectly fine, but sometimes problems do creep in. So I want to kind of, the way that I outline things is I'm going to hit on some of the major types of problems that could occur, and then I'm going to have specific examples and solutions to those specific examples. And hopefully this will help you when you're performing your testing with your upgrades. If you do hit into any of the problems, hopefully it'll help you to not get completely stuck and that you can move forward and proceed. So for starters, the first thing first, when you're doing the planning and testing for a new version, you're definitely going to want to make sure you're testing this out first. And that's a major part in finding the different quirks and problems that may arise is testing it. It's much better to find a problem a couple months ahead of time in your QA environment instead of finding a problem on the day of your production upgrade, and then it's you know, you spend a lot of time upgrading and then you got to try to reverse or work with support, and it just is not the most pleasant of processes. So I would definitely recommend, first things first, get a test environment set up. Try to make it as close to your production environment as possible. If you can replicate the hardware, especially with VMs, it could be easier. Just try to get it as close as you can. Once that's all done, you want to back up the clean MDB and then restore a copy of your production MDB. For Service Desk Manager, I did highlight that there's a table, the USB servers needs to be updated to reference the new server names. Notifications you're going to want to disable so that people aren't getting missed SLA notifications for a non-production environment. And then also delete environment-specific tables. Now, we have a whole document on this process that's linked in the helpful resources, which is at the end of this presentation. Something you can review later because we do have a whole step-by-step on how to do that. Let me just make sure I didn't mean to advance, but okay, I think we're good there. Okay, so a couple of the basics here. So the first thing, before you do the upgrade testing, you're going to want to make sure you back up any manually configured files. For example, if you happen to have SSL configured in your environment, you're going to want to make a backup of your server XML files so none of that information is lost. If you've hard-coded anything into your nx.env file, you may want to back those up so you have them, or any other configuration files. Those are just two basic ones. Just so you know what you have in place, and then you can always revert to it and put it back into place in the new environment. Another major thing to note is improper rights on the server. So even if you're logged in as somebody who is an administrator, very often there could still be some kind of domain policy in place that could restrict the ability to do certain tasks. So definitely when you're doing the setup.exe, running the setup, you're going to want to make sure you run it as administrator, run it as an administrator account to avoid those kind of issues. If you could log directly into the server as administrator, that could be helpful as well. Just something to kind of, it'll help solve a lot of problems just by doing that. It's possible that you may run into an instance where the installer may have some kind of conflict with a version of Java that could be installed on the server. So if you do run into those kind of issues, you may want to disable Java or remove older versions of Java that are no longer in use. Another significant one is ensuring that 8.3 name creation is enabled on your Windows servers. A lot of times by default, administrators will just disable the name creation, which does present a problem specifically for Service Test Manager. Now, if you're upgrading to 17.0, there is a pre-check that goes through and validates if you have 8.3 enabled or not. And if you don't, it won't allow you to proceed with the install. But if you do happen to be in process of upgrading to 14.1, that pre-check won't exist. So it's definitely something to be aware of. Make sure you have 8.3 enabled, otherwise you're going to run into some issues. Some possible system stability issues, also commands won't quite work very well. And again, I have a URL for that in helpful resources, which you can review at your leisure. All right, so the first thing that you may run into right out the gate is you run the setup.exe, but nothing happens. Nothing pops up, you get no screens. It's just, it almost seems as if nothing is happening at all. And there are things that are happening, actually. When the setup tries to launch, it performs different system checks and goes through system configuration files to validate different information on what's already installed. And if something gets tripped up, it may prevent the setup from even launching. So what you can do is there's two log files that get created right at the root of your C drive, scderr.txt and scdout.txt. You can look at those files, and this is something I would recommend. You just go to the bottom and look for the last thing written to the log, and that should provide you with some clues as to what may be happening. I have here an example. So the last thing written in the log was related to a value in the Service Test Manager nx.exe file related to the nx_bo_server location. And there was some problem specifically with the port. The port specified there was a mismatch for some reason, and that caused the setup to just not be able to launch. So kind of an easy thing, just go into the those log files, take a look and see if there's anything clear at the bottom, the last thing that occurs before the failure. Some other errors with the common installer. So firstly, database connection type errors. So just the basic stuff to validate that you have the proper rights to the database. If you're performing an initial install, obviously the main focus is upgrade, but if you're performing a new install as well, you need the rights to actually be able to create the database and to create the user accounts. So you definitely need a user that has some kind of elevated privileges when you're running the setup. Make sure the instance name is accurate, that the ports match the instance name. Another important thing is make sure you disable any database replication before you upgrade. Otherwise, of course, the replication is going to be trying to occur during the upgrade process, which is just not going to work out very well. So I have a couple of other examples of database problems. The first one here is an error related to the secured sockets layer encryption, and it says the TDS protocol stream is not valid. And this was found in the installer log itself. And if you run into this type of issue, it's more likely you would see this in 14.1, and it's related to a JDBC, which is actually trying to make a connection to the database. This was fixed in 17.0, so the JDBCs were all updated. But if you happen to be upgrading to 14.1, there are some manual steps, which if you review once again, the helpful resources has a link for that, and you can take a look at that. So you can proceed past that point. And that's basically if your database is secured with SSL, or if you're using some kind of stronger protocols on the database server, that it could trip up the install. Another common problem is an error unable to load the OCI library, or DLL cannot continue. This is obviously an Oracle type error, and you would typically run into this if you're using 64-bit libraries instead of the 32-bit libraries. Once again, there's a link in the helpful resources which goes over to that, and that's a problem you would see in almost any install release. We do require the 32-bit libraries. Another common issue is just straight up system resource issue. So I have another here, an example. The install log stated, you clearly see available disk space is 4746, while the required is 5120, and the install wouldn't proceed, obviously. Another thing you can, if you take a look at the install logs, it's kind of clear what the error is. Should hopefully help you to get it fixed and get on your way. A couple of things you can do to help clear up resource issues. Firstly, ensure your systems are correctly allocated. So if you're doing this in a test environment, like I said, try to match your production as much as you can. It's very tempting to underscope your QA environments, your dev environments, just because there's not any actual real-world traffic going on them. But if you underscope them too much, you may run into other issues. You can help to clear up, for this particular instance, obviously it was this space issue. A couple of things you can do to clean up some space. You could temporarily move your attachments to a different drive. You could remove old archives or back up your old archive files somewhere else. Clean up old logs, which may not be very helpful once the upgrade's completed anyway. And you could also remove backed up version folders. So if you made a backup of, let's say, your modifications, you may want to clean those up. Just some maintenance to the system to try to free up some space. Doesn't help. It doesn't hurt anything, and it's pretty clean and easy to do. So definitely be a recommended thing to move forward with. Okay, another common problem is auto-integrate. So a very helpful thing with the common installer is it does have some auto-integration functionality. And we're going to kind of touch on the different products that can auto-integrate with. So firstly, EEM. And so the unified installer will attempt to create administrator accounts, which are failing, and the application is unable to integrate with EEM. So one of the things that the installer tries to do is it will create an account, a CASM admin. If you're using service desk, you may try to create the service desk user. If you're using catalog, try to create a catalog user. It's going to attempt to create a user in EEM. If your EEM is configured for an external LDAP, which in reality most likely it's going to be, you would basically service, or the installer is trying to create an account into EEM into your LDAP, which is not going to happen. So common procedure is to make sure to pre-create the user accounts in your LDAP environment prior to the install, and then once you run the install, it'll find that matching user and then be able to proceed. Another thing you can do is you can disable your LDAP authentication temporarily and then proceed with the installer. Either option will allow it to get moving forward. For process automation, another common thing is SSL. This is an issue that we see often with ITAM, just a problem with the handshake basically between a process automation and the application. And there is a prerequisite document that we do have that you should review. It's in the helper resources. Once again, hopefully there'll be a lot of useful information that you can review after the fact in the helper resources. Next, auto integration failure possibility is related to unified self-service. And unified self-service is, of course, one of the products that's delivered in the install itself. But unified self-service integrates with Service Desk Manager and also integrates with Service Catalog. So during the install process, it will attempt to auto-integrate. And here's an example of a problem here where it was unable to update the data set within unified self-service, and I'll link it up. So to get yourself moving forward, you may need to manually configure your data sources after the install is complete. But one of the most frequent causes of this type of issue is related to system resources. Basically, the way the installer is designed is that it will wait 900 seconds, about 15 minutes, for USS to fully start up. And if USS is not fully started up within that time frame, it will just log it as a failure and not be able to move forward with the auto integration. And in a well-spec'd environment, unified self-service should not take 15 minutes to start up. But if your system is severely under-spec'd, it is very possible. Unified self-service does require a good amount of resources to function well. So just something to be aware of, that if your servers are not well allocated, it is possible that you may have to manually integrate USS to Service Catalog and Service Desk. Another thing is CDB tables. Now, this is something you're not really going to see if you're coming from an older version of Service Desk. The CDB tables are common database tables that were introduced in 14.1, and they exist in 17.0 as well, but they would not exist in earlier versions of any of the products that use the MDB. So this is something that you would really see if you were moving from 14.1 to 17.0. There's a possibility that basically the CDB tables store all the environmental information on what applications are installed on which servers, what ports are in use, how everything's tied together. So if you happen to be renaming servers, creating new servers, or even in your testing, if the names aren't going to match your production environment names, which is very usual, then you may have to do some cleanup of the CDB tables before going forward. So there is a cleanup utility, which is on the install media, and there's a whole guide on how to use that. There's a URL there, and you can go through and delete references to systems that are not valid, and that'll help with the install process as well. Specifically to Xflow, this is something else that there's only really a possibility of running into it if you're on a 14.1 cumulative 3 or newer. If you were migrating to 17.0, if you happen to already have Xflow in place, there is a couple of gotchas that you should be aware of. So firstly, when you perform the initial Xflow install, you select a web server type of either Apache or IAS. If you're doing an upgrade, you need to make sure that you select the same type of server type. Otherwise, you may get stuck. You could uninstall Xflow, just Xflow, and then reinstall it, and that'll correct the issues. But just something to be aware of, make sure you know what's in your environment before proceeding with the install. And if you did install Xflow, just use the same type of web server type. Another thing you may run into is with 17.0, there was some new Xflow functionality added. If you perform the upgrade and that functionality is missing, there's a couple of post steps which you can run through to hopefully clear up the issue. So of course, first and foremost, clear the browser cache on the user machine. Another thing is there's a temp directory folder which you can delete and delete the contents of and then restart Xflow, and it will rebuild the temp directory files. And then hopefully all your new functionality will be in place. So just a couple of things if you happen to have already upgraded to Xflow and you are moving to 17.0. So I didn't mention looking at some logs. So here's the list. Over the next 2 slides is the list of all of the primary logs to take a look at. So we have the common installer logs, logs for USS, and the service desk, service catalog, and APM logs. This is all here for your reference, and if you are running into any issues, those are the places you would want to look. All right, so now we're going to move into the database migration. We just have a couple of slides here. So one problem you may run into is related to dangling references. So I have here an example. Once again, it was in one of the log files, and you'll see the statement conflicts with the foreign key constraint, conflict occurs in the database, and we have all this information. So basically in this example, there was a bad data reference. There was a dangling reference. The CA-owned resource table contained a reference in the model_UUID field column that did not actually exist in the CA model def table. So there's any number of reasons how this could have happened, usually not through standard usage, but anything could happen. And if you do run into this kind of thing, usual manual cleanup of the database is going to be required. You have to remove that bad reference, and then you should be able to proceed. So hopefully you won't run into things like this too often, but just for your reference. And there's a whole document here that goes over the details of the setup MDB process. It's very detailed, very well written, goes over each step of the process of how the setup MDB updates things, what it's checking, what it's doing. And I definitely would recommend checking it out if you get a chance. So now we're going to get into the Service Desk Manager customization upgrade utility. And obviously this is very focused on Service Desk Manager specifically. So hopefully if you don't use Service Desk Manager today, hopefully you'll learn a little something. But if you're planning on moving to 17.0 Service Desk, this is definitely going to be helpful for you. Sorry about that. So let's go ahead and proceed. So this slide was actually in the last presentation. I'm just going to go over this, and we're going to actually do a demo today where I'm going to show you how it works, and just at a high level, and then we'll go from there. So firstly, the way that the tool works is you would have a copy of the previous releases out of the box file. So let's say you were going from 12.9 and moving to 17.0. So you would reference the location of the 12.9 out-of-the-box base HTMPL files or www files. You would also reference the customized files from the previous release, so any of your form customizations. You would then, it then does a comparison to the latest releases out-of-the-box files, once again, those 17.0 files. And then it merges the things together and outputs it to a location. And the tool does have a log file which contains different statuses. It is important to note that any files that did not successfully merge will need to be merged manually. There are several causes of what may not allow a file to merge well, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But if something does not merge correctly, it will require manual remediation, which is similar to the process prior to 17.0 anyway. But hopefully this tool will help get a large bulk of your customization files merged. So there's a couple of different possible outcomes and scenarios. So the first is successful. So if a merge is successful, it will place the newly merged file into a specified location, and all of the original file extensions will be preserved, and you'll be able to take that file and either move it to your site mods directory or whatever you want to proceed with it. You'll be all set. Another possible is partial. So the file would be renamed with an extension _partial_merge, and you would need to perform a manual analysis and manual merge. The logs will provide details on the exact problem with the merge of what caused it to fail to merge. So you will have to do some manual comparison. Usually we recommend using some text editor that has a compare feature, and you can just compare the file side by side and manually merge anything you need to. Two other possibilities, and these are more related to, just custom files with no out-of-the-box file. So for some reason, if you performed a customization on a 17.0 specific HTML form and it didn't exist in 14.1 or earlier release, then it's just going to keep the preserved extension and not really do anything with it. The other possibility, though, is if you have a custom file with no new out-of-the-box file. So if you created some kind of custom factory in your system, it's not going to be able to merge that information because it doesn't even really know what to do with it if it's a custom factory file. So it would just basically, it unmerges it, gives it an extension of extension_unmerged, and then you would just need to perform some validation on that. If the factory is all newly created by you, then hopefully you have a handle on what needs to be done to merge that. So here comes the time of the demo. Now, hopefully we'll have a good transition here to sharing. Let me, just give me 1 second. Okay. John, do you see that? Chris? You see?
I do.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, so first things first, there's a configuration file that exists in the Services Manager site config directory. It's called cu_env, and I have that open. Actually, I don't. Oh, I have it open here. And this contains all the configuration variables for the tool. We'll just go over them quickly. So the first one is if you're using an older release prior to 12.6, you may need to specify this. During the actual running of the application, it does already ask you to specify this, so you probably don't need to adjust it in the config file. Another thing that does, so you're going to have the previous base folder path. And by default, it's going to be in the NX root samples customization upgrade HTML original. That's where it is by default. If you happen to have the file somewhere else on the 17.0 server, so let's say again, say you're using 12.9, if you had the 12.9 HTML directory already existing someplace on the server, you could change the path to specify that. For the testing today, what I did was I just took a full copy of the web directory from I actually did 14.1, a 14.1 system. There's also there's a sample that's included out of the box in 17.0 called test that you can actually do a test with. But aside from that, I copied all of the forms from 14.1 and put them into the original directory. Then what you can also do is then you're going to specify the path of the customization folder. And so this is, once again, this is where you would put the older version customization file. So if you had 12.9 or in my example 14.1, I have the let's see, it's upgrade HTML site. Okay. Yeah. So these are the forms that existed in my 14.1. So I have a detail IN, detail ISS. I also have an employee customization here. Like I said, very basic what I did here. And the test is also here because that is one of the out-of-the-box sample that we provide. So I just put that there, left it there as well. The next thing is, the next path specified is the new base folder. So this is going to point to the 17.0 files that are going to be used in the comparison. Now, out of the box, and I need to specify here the CUENV, out of the box, if you look at that file, it's actually specifying this future directory. I adjusted it in mine so that I'm actually just pointing directly to the bobconfig www.htmpl. That way I don't have to copy the file to two locations. So you can make this similar kind of change. It's already kind of referenced here in the notes up above. But when you actually look at the configuration file, it's pointing to the future directory. So you can manually adjust that and save it. The last folder specified is the location where the merge is going to go. And that is in, by default, the same directory, merged. Also to note, by default, the only files it's going to compare are HTMPL and CSS files. It's not going to make any comparison of spell files or mod files. This is solely for form level customizations. Then there's other the log locations, which probably you're going to leave a lot of this stuff as default, but just to show you that it's what's all present there. So what you can do is you're going to launch the file. So it's customization_upgrade.bat. It resides in your bin directory. If your bin directory is in the path, which technically it probably will be after the install, you can run the setup, the bat file from any location. I'm browsing directly into the bin. Just going to initiate it. And so the first question you get asked is if you're using an older version of Service Desk or not. If you're using a version of 12.5 or lower, you need to enter a 1, otherwise a 0. I'm just going to put 0. And then it kind of just shows you all the path information, and you can go and next to that. And please wait while I copy all files. Now, I'm not going to let this go on the fly because this process is going to take several minutes to do the full comparison. So I kind of cheated here. And this is, I ran it yesterday, and this is basically what the output is going to look like. So it goes through, it does the copying, it does the comparisons. Here it says, 2 files updated successfully. It's going to go through the full content. It's going to scroll down to the bottom here. And this is what you're going to see at the end. So stats, 3 merged, 2 unable to merge, 0 copied. So everything was able to merge successfully. My form customizations, just so for transparency's sake, I removed a bunch of fields. I renamed fields. I added some things. I removed some tabs, different things of that nature. And those were able to successfully merge. In my case, nothing was unable to merge, and nothing gets copied out of the box by default. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here now. If you go, the folder got renamed as merged with all these numbers because I started another process. So you can, if you run it multiple times, it creates another version of the folder. So in this case, I could take these 2 files, copy them into my site mods directory location, and my process is done. Now, in this case, you see this one is test.htmpl unmerged. Now, why did this happen? Once again, if you may remember from earlier in the presentation, if the file test.htmpl does not exist in the 17.0 forms, which it doesn't, it's going to just rename it as htmpl_merged. It's assuming this is some kind of custom form that I created that doesn't exist. I can then take this, review it, and when I have reviewed that it's ready to go, I could rename it to HDMPL and put it in my directory. You can also see employee, I had a file here. That's all done as well. And another thing you can do is you can go into in the service test log directory is all the log information. This is very similar to the output of the, that's in the command prompt itself, but you can review this later on if you want. Okay, so let me go ahead and stop sharing and get back to the presentation. Do we see the presentation again?
I do.
Yep. Okay. All right, so what could occur? So some exceptions that could cause the merge to fail. So if the number of the customizations is too large, it could potentially cause it to fail. In my test case, I removed tons of, like almost half the fields. I removed almost most of the tabs. I renamed a bunch of stuff. I added some stuff, and that was not too large. So not sure exactly where the cutoff is. I don't know if I could like clearly define that. But if the customization is too large and complex, it could potentially cause it to be unable to merge. When the customization content has location has changed, so if you move a reference from one side of the file to the other and it's expecting to see something that's supposed to be present but it's not, it could cause the merge to get confused and could cause it to fail. The other common thing is when customization files split into multiple out-of-the-box files. So if you have references to other files, it could potentially cause the auto merge to not be able to complete. For your sake, you can increase the log level, which can help you debug that a little bit further if you'd like. From a support perspective, there's only a limited amount of functionality we'll be able to do because if the tool doesn't function well, you basically just need to do a manual merge as you would with any other release of Service Desk. The main thing is hopefully this tool will get a majority of your forms merged over, so it'll ease the process of upgrading. And if I'm not mistaken, yeah, that pretty much wraps this up. So just a kind of a drive through the helper resources. I have all these links here, which I hope that you'll review once it's all posted to the communities. Take a look at all this. And now it's time for the Q&A session. All right, so we're going to go ahead and open it up. Before we get started officially, I guess, John and Raghu, were there any questions out there, or was it pretty quiet today?
There was just one question that Raghu answered. It was about do the log files get generated at the root of the C drive even if you're installed on the D? And the answer is that they do. They get put wherever the OS is located, so they'll go right to the C drive in most cases.
Okay, thank you, John. Chris, do we need to open up the lines, or how do we do that?
Yeah, folks, you can use the Q&A to ask questions. You can also use your phone line. If you want to open your line, it's #6 to open your line up to ask a question verbally. I don't know, Alex, you might have covered everything. So again, folks, Q&A is open to question. Also, you can use your phone line by #6. We'll unmute your line and ask the question.
And of course, if there's any questions after the fact as well, we're in the communities, John, Raghu, and I, and we'll keep an eye out. We do have a question here. When you say too many files may fail the migration utility, what if the number is too big? So it's not necessarily the files, the number of files, it's the complexity of the customization itself, if I'm not mistaken. Raghu, did you have any other clarification on that?
I think you hit the nail on it. Basically, it's the complexity. So let's say you got a form with multiple sub-tabs on it, and you started adding like 10 more tabs there. Those sort of complex customizations may not be merged the right way. But it's not the number of files. It's more about the complexity on the form.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing you're going to run into with a large number of files is the tool may take a while to complete because it's actually comparing 3 different files against each other and trying to determine the best output and then creating the merged version of the file. So if you have 1,000 files, it's going to take a bit to complete. But aside from the number of files, there shouldn't be any problem with a large number of actual individual HTML files.
Any more questions, folks? Again, #6 to unmute your line.
Okay, we have another question out there. Any situation with merge file did not work in the new environment? I haven't seen a situation where the merge file didn't work. I can't think of any example. Usually if the merge is successful, it should be proper to proceed.
I would agree. Yeah, if the merge was successful, I think it should function okay. But again, if we do encounter any situations like that, we could probably try tackling them. Of course, you always have the option to manually merge them too. So.
Yeah. Where do we find the helpless resources? So that's actually in the presentation itself, Sharon. It was kind of a couple of slides. I thought it would be a little boring for me to just bring up web pages and go through them. So what you can do is after this presentation's over, Chris will get it posted to the communities, and then you can go through it, and the full URLs are in the document. You can go to all that. We have another question. Let me just scroll down so I can actually see the whole thing. About the databases in MDB, is commonly seen that tables have a primary key, but the new tables as PR_WF does not have this key. It's a new policy that the tables don't have a primary key. Who's answering that question right now?
I think I just took care of it. Basically, it's not that our policy is to create tables with our primary keys. It's just that wherever we see the necessity with our design, we sort of make tweaks there, and some tables do end up without primary keys because of that reason.
Thank you, Rigo.
Okay, do we have any more questions, folks? We got a few minutes left.
Okay.
Okay, one more.
So service management 17 can be upgraded from 12.9. Can we do an upgrade? SDM only? Do you mean, just to clarify, I'm not sure, is the question that you just want to upgrade just Service Desk Manager but not Service Catalog, for example, or is there something else to the question? If that's the question, I would definitely say that you probably want to get your system, all the applications upgraded. especially from 12.9 to 17, because you're missing out on the potential for a lot of those integration points that are only introduced in newer releases. If the question is something else, okay, catalog 12.9. Raghu, John, are you aware of any specific problem with using an older version of catalog and a new version of service desk?
No, as long as they are, as long as the certification matrix shows that those two applications are compatible, I don't see a problem with it. But I don't believe we've had anybody do that. People who are using the solution generally will want to upgrade the whole thing at one time.
And I do know there is, okay, it says 12.9 catalog and not certified with 17. If that's the case, then I think you're potentially opening yourself up for some problems if you attempt to only upgrade one application, not the other. You could probably do one, I doubt you would probably want to do them all in the same day, but I think your upgrade plan should definitely be to get them done as soon as possible. I hope that answers your question. Okay, we have another question. My test environment is 14.1 Q3 and prod is Q2. Do you see any issues or difference that I might see when upgrading? So if you're moving to 17.0, no, I would say the potential for problems is fairly low. It's all the same base code line. Obviously, there's some differences in deliverables. If you're using Xflow in your test environments, I guess that's something just to be aware of. I kind of mentioned earlier in the presentation some gotchas with relation to Xflow. But aside from that, I don't really foresee any issues. You're welcome, Stephanie.
Okay, any more questions out there, folks? All right, Alex, I think we're good. So thank you, Alex, for this great presentation. Thank you, John and Raghu, for jumping in. Thank you, everybody, for participating today. The recording will be posted in the next few days up to the site. And we'll also get a copy of this presentation up there so that you have all of the links and information. Anything else, Alex or gang?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so again, thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye-bye.